my name is Jennifer Bland. Bland, just like the personality, so it's easy to remember. I am a software developer, and today I'm going to be talking about form validations in Vue. And I'm going to give you examples of writing form validation using two different tools. They're going to be Beautify and Vuelidate. The thing is, the challenge I'm going to have in my presentation is I have 30 minutes to go through 45 slides. So I'm going to do this presentation like I drive, which is fast, very fast, which will become apparent in one of my slides. So let's get started. I always start my presentations with a game that I have that's called 3 Truths and 1 Lie. There are 4 items that are on the screen. Number 1, I was elected to the school board at the age of 16. Apple Computer paid for my MBA. My senior year of high school cost more than my freshman year at university. And number 4, I earned only 1 A at university. 3 of those items are true about myself. 1 is not true. So I will let you marinate on which one you think is not true, because at the very end of my presentation, I'll give you a chance to guess which one is not true. So the first thing we want to start with is, why do we want to provide form validations in our Vue application? Almost every website that you visit today has a form that asks you to fill something out. It can be a simple WordPress blog that asks you to fill out a contact form. It can be an e-commerce website that has a cart checkout form so you can buy something. Even our local traffic courts happen to have a form for you to fill out to request rescheduling your court date in case your court date happens to be tomorrow and you're in a conference in Toronto. So the biggest complaint that people have with forms is that they don't provide generally enough feedback to the users when they're filling out those forms. How many of you ever filled out a form, you click submit, and you get an error message saying that the form was not filled out correctly? It's very frustrating for your users to have to be faced with something like that. So one of the ways that you can handle that is to provide a very nice interface for your users. So I'm going to show you how to create client-side form validations using both Beautify and Vuelidate. So the first one I'm going to start with is Beautify. Beautify is a Vue UI library. It provides a wide range of material components. It has, I think, over 80 different components that you can use. It provides full accessibility, and it supports server-side rendering. It's very easy to create forms using any of the Beautify components. If you have a Vue project and you want to add Beautify to it, it's very simple to do. You just run the command vue add Beautify, and it will add it to your project. Once you've added it and have it installed, you have to configure it as a plugin for your Vue application to be able to use, and you just import it in, and then you tell Vue that you're actually going to be able to use it. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to go through, and I'm actually going to show you examples of 2 different common forms that you might have on a website. And the first one we're going to talk about is a login form. And generally, a login form will look something like this. It will have a place for the user to put in their username and their password to be able to save that. And if you were going to create that login form using Beautify, you would just use a very simple vtext field, which is one of the components that is part of Beautify. And for each of the fields, you put in a label. So my username has a label of username. My password field has a name of password. For my password field, I'm also telling that it's a type of password so that when you type in your password, somebody standing beside you is not going to be able to see that. So that's how you would create that form. So now the next thing is, what do you need to do to be able to add form validations to those fields? There are 2 things that you actually have to do. The first thing that you have to do is you have to make those fields required. And the second thing that you have to do is you have to define the rules that you're going to use to validate against the input that the user has put into those fields. So I'll take the vtext field for the username, and you'll see that I've added onto it the required props so that this shows that this is required, and then I've put in the rules that are necessary that I'm going to validate against this field. And the way that the rules work is it's an array, and in the array you can have as many different validations as you want against that field. And what you have is each of the validations is a method. The method is passed in the value that the user has typed in into the field. And what I'm doing in my error checking method here is I'm checking that, just making sure that the user has typed something into the field. Not doing anything greater than that, than in terms of the validation. And if the user has not typed in anything into the field, they're going to get the error message, which is the username is required. So now if we go back and we look at our login form, you'll see here the error messages that are generated if the user has not typed in anything in either one of the fields and they try to actually go through and actually submit the form itself. So let's actually go through and do something a little bit more detailed than just checking to see if a user has typed something into a field in order to validate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to do a registration form where we're going to check things in a little bit more detail than what we were doing with our login form. So here's what our registration form looks like. It has a place for the user to put in their email and their password. Now, in terms of validation, I don't want to just check that they've typed something in. I actually want to go through and validate that they've typed something valid in. So for example, let's look at the email field. I want to basically validate that they've typed something into the field and that what they've typed in is a valid formatted email address. Doesn't mean it's a valid email address, it just follows the standard rules of an email address. So here's what we've looked at. The changes that I've done is I've gone through, I still have the required prop that's on the vtext field. And for the rules, instead of putting the array of the rules directly onto the vtext field, I've changed it here where I'm putting in the rules and it's looking to a data object that's called email rules. And I'm doing that just simply because it makes things a little bit easier to read. So in my data, I have my email rules. And in my email rules, here's the array that I originally had directly on the vtext field. And it's an array, so there's two validations that I'm making against this email field that's put in. I'm doing what I had initially, is I'm making sure that the user has typed something into the field. And then the next thing I'm validating against is just a simple regex expression where it's looking to see if what the user has typed in is a semi-formatted properly email address, where it's looking for them to type in something, then have the @ sign, type in something, and then have a dot sign, and then have something that's being put in. And if they don't put all of that information in, then what they're going to end up getting is an error message. So next, what we want to look at is the next field that we have in our registration form, and that's it for our password. And our password is going to have a little bit more details on it. I'm taking the same route that I did with my email field. I'm putting the rules into the data just to make things a little bit easier to read. So I have in my data a thing called password rules. So here's what I've put in for my password rules. And I've kept the original validation that I have, that I'm expecting the user to type something in for their password. I'm also checking to make sure that the length of what they've typed in for their password when they register has to be at least 5 characters. You can choose any length that you want, but what I'm doing is I'm checking to make sure that the password is at least 5 characters. Now, at the beginning of my presentation, I talked about why do you want to do form validations in a Vue application. And the main reason is that you want to provide a good user experience. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you've gone in and you've tried to register on a website, and they ask you for your email and your password? So you type in ratracegrat@gmail.com, and you type in password for your password, and you click submit. And it comes back and it says, that doesn't work because your password needs to have at least one uppercase character. So you're like, okay, it's cleared out the form, so you now got to type in your email again, ratracegrat@gmail.com, and you type in password, but you make the P uppercase, and you click submit. And it comes back and it goes, and it says, you must not also have a uppercase character, but you also need to have a number. So you type in ratracegrat@gmail.com, again, for your email address. You type in passwords with capital letter P, and you put a 1 at the very end, and you click submit. And guess what? It goes, you need to have an uppercase letter, you need to have a number, and you need to have a special character from these list of special characters that we provide. So you type in ratracegrat@gmail.com again, you type in password with an uppercase P, you type a 1 at the end, and you put a splat character because that's one of the required special characters that you put in, and you click submit, and you're able to finally register on a website. How many of you have had the frustration of dealing with a form like that before? Anywhere in the world. So let's go through and look at what we can do in our form validations to account for scenarios like that. So I've gone through and I've expanded on my password rules that I created originally. I have my original requirement in that the user has to put in something into the field. The password has to be at least 5 characters, but then I've added in 3 more things to be able to test against. And one is that you have to have an uppercase character, you have to have at least 1 number in your password, and you must have a special character, and it's from these choices of special characters that are available to you. So now that you've done that, the way that Beautify goes through and it handles the validation is it looks at the rules, it validates against the first thing. Okay, users put something in. Then they check the next one in the rules. Is your password at least 5 characters? If any one of those fail as it's going through, it's going to generate the error message for that first one. It doesn't give you the error message for all of them. So there is an option that you can put in, and one of the things that you can put into your text field is there's another prop that you can add, and it's called an error count. By default, it's going to show you 1 error at a time. So as it's going down, the first one that it fails on, it's going to give you that error message. So what you can do is you can specify and say, instead of using the 1 default, I'm going to say, give them 5 error messages. So if a user tries to come into my registration form and fails to put something in, and they're giving an error message, I'm giving them all of the details that they need to do in order to register successfully on my form. And this is why you provide a good user experience instead of having a user just having to go through repeatedly trying to log on to a particular form itself. So next, I'm going to go through and talk about how to do the exact same form validations for both of those forms using Vuelidate. Vuelidate is basically, it's a lightweight model-based validation program that you can use with Vue. If you want to install it into your into your Vue application, it's very simple. You just do an npm install for Vuelidate. And then you install it as a plugin just like you were doing with Beautify. You import it, and then you tell Vue that you're going to be using that so that it's available in your application itself. So what we want to do is look at the very next thing is our login form. A couple of things are going to be different in doing the exact same form validation and Vuelidate than what we just went through in using Beautify. We're still going to have required put onto the field, but instead of having errors, we're going to have a thing that's going to say error messages and then the name of a method that it's going to check against the input to make sure that it passes all of our validations. So that's one of the things that we're going to do that's different. The other thing is we have to import from the Vuelidate library all of the validators that we actually want to use. So in our login form, the only validator that I need to import in is the required validator. And that validator is, you can see it here where it's actually imported in for me to be able to use. Next, you have to add a validation section in your script, and you tell it what validators are going to be used against every field on your form. I happen to have two fields, my username and my password, and for those, I'm just using the required validators, so they have them on there. And then also, what I have next is I have my username errors, and this is the method that's going to be called that's going to check to make sure that what you've typed in is actually correct or in there. It's similar to Beautify in that you have an array of error messages. So I start off with an empty array, and when I come into this field, this $V is the value of what the user has typed into the field. So that's provided to me. And I'm checking it against the required validator to make sure that the user has put something into the field. And if they haven't, I'm going to put into my errors array the error message to display to the user, which is just username is required, and I'm going to return that errors array back to the field, and you actually see the error message being displayed on the screen itself. And for the passwords, I'm going to pretty much do the exact same thing. I'm going to make sure that it's required, and if they have not put something in, I'm just going to pass back the error message that says that the password is required. And when you look at your logon field form, it looks exactly the same thing as what you got with Beautify. It's a little bit different in how you handle the validation itself. So now all of our validations work. Well, it kind of works. There's something that we missed, and we went through this whole process, is when you start typing into the field, that error message is still being displayed to me, which is not what I want to be displayed because it's saying it's required. I clearly have put something into the field, so you can't tell me it's not required because I've got something in there. So to correct what I showed you originally, you have to go through and add a little bit more things for it to do the validations with Vuelidate. And in there, what you end up having is that you have to tell Vuelidate to do testing for the validation every time that the user is typing into the field, and also every time that the user leaves the field. And you can do that by putting in the @input, where it calls the name of the field username.touch, and that's basically telling Vuelidate to go out and actually check and make sure everything that is correct on there. So now, when I've added that, I start typing into the field, my error message goes away, and it's no longer being displayed to the users. So next, what we want to do is we want to look at our registration form and see what we have to change to make things work correctly on there. Now, I'm going to import in 2 more validators that are provided with Vuelidate. I've already used required. I'm also going to require a min length because I want your password to be at least 5 characters long. And then there is an email validator where it validates that what a user types into an email field is a properly formatted email. I was previously using a regex expression, which is not 100% accurate, but they provide a validator that provides that functionality to us. So the changes that I need to do in my registration form is for my email and for my password, instead of having just required, for my email, I'm also going to be using the email validator. And for the password, I'm also going to be using the min length validator, and I'm specifying that the min length has to be at least 5 characters that are on there. The other thing that I want to do is I go out into my email errors, and this is the method that's being called every time the user types into the field or when they actually leave the field. And what I'm going to do is I check the input that's being put into that field, and I check it against the email validator. And if it doesn't validate, I'm going to send an error message back that says, must be a valid email. And then I also have, of course, the email is required. It's a lot simpler to do an email validation in Vuelidate than it is directly in Beautify. So next, let's go through and look at what we need to do in order to look at our password, because we have all those requirements that we need to have in there for our password. The first line in there, I have an if, where it's checking to see if this.$v.password.dirty. I have that also on my email field. And what that is, the first thing that I'm going to check on is the field by default is pristine until the user starts typing into it, and then it becomes dirty. I don't want to do any validations for this field if the field is not dirty, meaning that the user has not done any interaction with the field. So I don't want to bother checking that. So that first if statement is checking to make sure that the field is dirty. And if it isn't, then it's just going to return the empty array, which means don't generate any error messages. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to check all of my requirements for my password. It's got to be there. You've got to put something in. It has to be at least 5 characters long. It has to have an uppercase letter, it has to have a number, and it has to have a special character. So it's going through and it's going to do all of those tests, and if you fail, therefore what Vuelidate will give you is the exact same thing that you would have gotten with Beautify, where it tells you all of the errors that are possible for that single field that is out there. So that's what I wanted to do, was to just walk you through how to go through and do very simple form validations that you can do client-side in your application so that it provides a much better user experience. So everybody get your cameras out, get ready. I'm going to tell you how to get the code. What I've done is I've created an application that you can get. And when you run the application, it will take you to the home page, and you actually get to see the great logo for the conference. You know, this is my talk on view form validations. Up in the top right in the navigations, you have a button for both Beautify and Vuelidate. If you click on either one of them, you're going to get a tab, and you've got a choice between seeing both the login form as well as the registration form. And then you have it. And if you want to get my code so you can actually see all of the examples that I talked about, you can go out to my GitHub repo, which is github.com/ratracegrad, so that you can see it. Now, for the moment that I know you've all been waiting for, the answer to my quiz on the 3 truths and 1 lie. So, roll of hands, how many of you think, number 1, I was elected to the school board at 16 is not true? Okay, number 2, how many of you think Apple Computer paid for my MBA is not true? Okay, number 3, how many of you think my senior year of high school cost more than my freshman year at university is not true? Okay, and number 4, how many of you think I earned only 1 A at university is not true? Okay, for all of you great folks that chose number 1, you won. So the other 3 items are all true about myself. Quick thing is my Twitter account, if you want to follow me, is ratracegrad. I do write frequently. I write on medium.com. My URL to get to my articles are at ratracegrad. I also write on dev.to is ratracegrad. And so if any of you took a picture of me while I'm up here, please post out there and tag me so I can share it with my mother, who has no clue what I do for a living, but she would be proud to see me on stage. So thank you very much.